Good evening and welcome to a new episode of our program, The Daily Debates. Wednesday evening, I'm Yasmin Bakir. Tonight's episode, we're going to be shedding light on the Egyptian support to present to the African countries and the support, rather, that Egypt is giving to the African countries on all levels. And we do know that on different occasions, Egypt is always announcing its commitment to pursue the efforts in order to promote the joint cooperation with the African countries and to show its joint efforts and support on various levels. Now, that's all as part of fulfilling the agenda of the African Union for 2063, the Africa that we want, to eliminate all the challenges and the obstacles that are facing the African continent, whether it's poverty, illiteracy, uneducation, better life conditions, better standards, better employment opportunities, and of course better infrastructure. And so much that needs to be done, but only would be achieved with the cooperation between the different African countries. So we're going to be talking about that with our guest who's going to be joining us later on in the episode. But we do have a number of things that we do want to also recap in this episode. Let's take a look at the first story for this evening. And Foreign Minister Shukri chairs a ministerial meeting in order to discuss the regional affairs. Now, Foreign Minister Sameh Shukri had chaired on Wednesday a ministerial meeting discussing the regional affairs on the sidelines of the 155th session of the Arab League Ministerial Council. Foreign Minister of Egypt, Jordan and Palestine have also agreed upon the importance of continuing to work during the coming period in order to create an environment that's conducive to serious and constructive negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israeli parties. The discussions have aimed to reach a comprehensive, just and lasting peace that guarantees the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in accordance with the borders of the June 4th, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. The ministers have also stressed the importance of building on the momentum that is witnessed in the last period, aimed at moving the peace process issue on several tracks, and they praised the outcomes of the last meeting of the Arab League of States of Council at the ministerial level in its extraordinary session. Now, to further shed light on the meeting today and the agenda and the significance of its timing, we are joined over the phone by His Excellency Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for joining us, Your Excellency. Good evening.
Good evening, madam.
The meeting that has been held today, which is on the sidelines of the 155th session of the Arab League Ministerial Council, let's talk more about the significance of its timing and the agenda of this meeting today.
The meeting, are you referring to the which meeting? Which meeting are you referring to specifically, madam? The trilateral meeting between the Egyptian Foreign Minister and his Jordanian and Palestinian counterparts, or?
Yes, I was talking basically, the session itself. We are going to dive later on into the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and that resolution that came out. But let's talk about the session itself. It's different and it comes at a significant time indeed.
Well, this is the ordinary session of the Ministerial Council of the Arab League. According to the Charter, the Ministerial Council takes place twice a year. One in March and one in September. So this session, the 155th session, comes in the context of the Charter of the Arab League. What's significant about this session? The fact that the Secretary General of the Arab League, the mandate was renewed.
Yes.
For the next 5 years. And this is the first session that takes place after the reconciliation between the four Arab countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain on the one hand, and Qatar on the other hand. And in fact, the Egyptian presidency of the outgoing session now has been replaced by the Qatar's presidency till next September. And speaking of which, we were heartened to learn that the Egyptian foreign minister met with the Qatari foreign minister in a tete-a-tete, and that this is a good sign that the reconciliation is on track for the best interests of all parties concerned. On the other hand, of course, there has been a consensus on the two-state solution.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask you on now, Your Excellency. The Egyptian efforts in resolving the Palestinian or settling the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We do know that the peace process has been stalled for very long years. With the renewal of the mandate of the Secretary General of the Arab League and with the resolving of the differences between certain Arab countries, how do you see this going to be a pivotal role that will be played in the upcoming stage to reach a concrete solution? A concrete two-state solution, if I may say?
Well, of course, after the change of administration in the United States last January, hopes have been rekindled for the two-state solution. You may recall that during the last 4 years, the former American administration never showed any interest in the two-state solution. On the contrary, it wanted to impose a peace plan based entirely on Israeli planning and Israeli interests. So with the change of administrations in Washington last January, there is new elements. Now the Arab world and the Palestinians, more specifically, are interested in sounding out the new administration on the possible venues, the possible avenues, its possible approach to the resumption of peace negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Having said that, it's very encouraging that the Biden administration has reaffirmed that the peace deals reached between Israel and some Arab countries last year, these deals are no substitute for the solution of the Palestinian problem and for the two-state solution. So here, I guess this is encouraging news. But on the Arab side and on the Palestinian side, there is unanimity on the need to push for the resumption of peace negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Secretary General of the Arab League today spoke about the Arab League and the Arab support for Palestinian elections this year. You may recall, Madam, that parliamentary elections in Palestine would take place in May. Presidential elections are scheduled for July. And 1 month later, the elections of what's called the Palestinian National Council, which is the parliament that represents all Palestinians in the diaspora and in the occupied territories and in East Jerusalem. So Arab countries are supporting and are providing support for the Palestinians. And in this framework, let me just talk about the meeting that took place yesterday between the Egyptian foreign minister
and the Sudanese,
Jordanian and Palestinian counterparts. This is the second meeting to take place in Cairo. The first one took place 1 month and a half. And at that time, the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, received the three ministers and stressed at the time on two things. The first thing is that the Arabs, the Palestinians, should work together with other partners in order to push for the resumption of peace talks between Palestine and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, and no less important than the first one, is the implementation of what's called reconciliation agreements among Palestinian factions, particularly between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
Yes.
So this time around, the second ministerial meeting between Egypt, Jordan, and Palestine takes place after the encouraging signals coming out of Washington about a two-state solution.
Yes.
So,
I just have, unfortunately, we just have 2 minutes, and I really want to wrap up with a very important statement concerning what His Excellency Minister Shukri had mentioned today. And when he spoke about maintaining the Arab national security, he ensured the need for Syria to return to the Arab League. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, I fully support this Egyptian position. I fully support it. It was a mistake to begin with to separate Syria from the Arab League. And I hope that there will be an Arab consensus on that, although I doubt it at the present stage. Let's wait and see. Egypt called for the resumption, for the reinstatement of Syria membership Arab League. Let's wait and see whether this will be done in the foreseeable future. I understand that there are some Arab countries that maybe are not yet very enthusiastic about that, but one way or another, Syria must return to the Arab League.
Yes, very well. Your Excellency Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining us on a daily debate this evening. We're going to move to our first report this evening, and the second edition of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development was held. And when we return back, we're going to also be joined over the phone to discuss with an expert the potentials of this forum. Back again, you're still watching us here on the Daily Debate, and to discuss furthermore about the Egyptian-African relations and facing these challenges to be able to reach to the 2063 agenda. And specifically, this is a good opportunity to talk more about the joint cooperation between Egypt and Nigeria. I'm joined in the studio this evening with Mr. Nasser Refaei, a Nigerian journalist. Thank you for joining us here on Nile TV International.
Thank you very much.
Let's start by talking about the second forum for Aswan and its importance, and how do you view the agenda this year, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and Egypt's cooperation with the rest of the African continent to be able to contain this pandemic?
Of course, Egyptian government since many years ago trying to, joined hand together with the rest of the African countries, especially before the arrival of this pandemic COVID-19, to fight the terrorism that began, I think, maybe in the last years, about maybe 11, 12 years ago, especially in Nigeria, Mali, or I can say West African countries. There is a big challenge for the terrorism, but Egyptian leader Al-Fattah Sisi was trying to, to bring the attention of the international
organizations,
to try to be together with the African countries to face these big challenges. But unfortunately, some countries didn't realize what is really coming to the African continent at that time, unless after it is been late, so that now the African countries facing and then trying to overcome these challenges, but unfortunately they couldn't until this time around. These forums, this is not the first time the Egyptian government hosting these similar forums, economically and politically and the other aspects. But it's good that when the Egyptian leader, Refaei Sisi, trying to bring the attention of the African leaders to face these serious challenges, especially this time around when a lot of African countries, they could not be able to find that vaccine for their people. So I think this forum is very, very important to bring the attention of the African leaders to try to bring the necessary vaccine to their people.
Sir, how long have you been here in Egypt?
Oh, a long time.
Long time. So you're very well acquainted with the culture of Egypt, and of course, as a journalist, definitely going without say following up on. Let's talk more about the efforts that Egypt has been making during the past couple of years, and especially with regard to its presidency of the African Union. Let's talk about the concrete changes that Egypt has brought about within the African Union or under the umbrella of the African Union to serve the African communities.
Really, Egyptian government has brought a lot of changes to the African Union, especially when the Refaei Sisi leads the union during 2019, I think, to 2020, I think. At that time, there is a lot of activities that has been made to the African continent, because at that time, I know even here in Egypt, there is different countries of Africans, and was trying to, the Ministry of Youth and Sport here in Egypt try to bring together the African youth here in Egypt to try to, to join hands together to help the continent of achieving a lot of programs that Refaei Sisi wants to bring up to help the other African countries. At that time, even I myself, I was one of the, those who participate that program, and it was very, very, it was very
successful.
Important, successful really, and it helped a lot to the Africans, because a lot of the people that attend that program, they came out with
experiences,
experiences, and then trying to mobilize their people, even during the media or the social, different aspects to mobilize their people, how the importance of coming together with the uses of Africa from different corners, west, north, south, every Africans to come together and to serve the African continent, because otherwise, depending on the Western countries to bring something to the African, that is very, very, it's very hard. And then on the other side, I can say, sometimes it will be like somebody wants to give you a food so that he will not allow you to try to find yours.
Of course.
So always he wants you to depend on him. So that is what happened even for fighting against terrorism. When you look at when the country from Africa trying to bring weapons from from the Western countries, you can make a contract, but these weapons will come to you maybe after 2-3 years. So that means, and then at the same time, those people, terrorists, they can have a heavy guns that they fight the different governments in different countries in Africa, which they could not be able to fight against them unless they go to the Western countries to bring the weapons, new weapons. But unfortunately, before the weapons come, a lot of death is
taking place. We'll talk more about eliminating terrorism and the political will and cooperation between Egypt and the rest of its African brothers. But maybe we can take this opportunity to discuss further the Egyptian-Nigerian cooperation.
Exactly.
Maybe a lot of people are not very familiar with the type of political, cultural, trade even exchange between both Egypt and Nigeria. Maybe this is an opportunity. I'm sure you're very much indulging into this field as well, and you'd like to share it with us.
Yeah, exactly. The African, the Egyptian-Nigerian, Egyptian-Nigerian collaboration or cooperation in different aspects is very well, because but unfortunately it comes lately, but it's better than not. We Nigerians living here, even I think we try to we try to endorse this this cooperation between the two countries. Of course, this is the first time. It was the first time this year that Nigerians have a Nigerian community association here in Egypt. So this association try to help for bringing up well and the considerate and the solid cooperation between the Egyptian and the Nigerians in terms of economics. It's very, very important because to bring to expose and to import their goods from the both countries is very important, because there is some goods that maybe are needable here in Egypt. Also, there are some goods also needed in the Nigeria that wants to bring them from here in Egypt. So it's very, very important, the cooperation between the two countries, even though the two countries are the most populated countries in Africa. If you can add maybe Ethiopia, but Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa, because it's double Egypt. Nigeria is about maybe 200 million. Yeah, it's very, very heavy.
Yes, it's overpopulated, you mean?
Exactly. That's why everything happening in Nigeria, even fighting the terrorism, is very hard to our government to encounter this terrorism, because Nigeria is very large. It's very, very large. And then there is a desert that those terrorists, they use to hide when they ambush the civilian in the different cities in Nigeria.
It would be a good opportunity to also discuss further more about the cooperation between Egypt and Nigeria. If you allow us, I have to take in this phone call with us live. His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Al Arabi, former Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for joining us on Nile TV International, Your Excellency.
It is a pleasure.
We're talking here about not just the second forum for Aswan, but this is also a good opportunity to talk about the Egyptian role in resolving the different challenges in Africa, which indeed is a very long list. But if you were to tell us about how you see the active and pivotal role that Egypt is playing today in the Horn of Africa, what can you tell us?
I think Egypt has a very, I would say, ambitious plan in order to enhance its, policy and enhance its presence in Africa. And we already, regained a lot of impetus for our relationship with the African countries since, the President Sisi assumed his role as the President of Egypt. And I can detect that, a lot of fields of cooperation now starts to be flourishing in different, fields. And I think this forum of Aswan, it is a very good step and a real significance that Egypt now playing an important role in Africa, despite the fact that there is some, problems now facing the African countries since the COVID-19 starts, last year. And I think we had the lead at the time to show that Egypt is very much interested, to help the African countries in order to face this wave of COVID-19. And we already extend, our help to different countries in that field. This is one of the important strategic policies Egypt adopted now since the President Sisi, assumed his presidency. And I think we will continue, in this policy for the near future, and of course for the long period of our cooperation with the African countries. And maybe our role also in the African Union is very important, and it's a real significance that Egypt starts now to be a major player in the field of the African interests and African concerns. I hope this policy will prevail for good, and I think this is our plan now. And maybe we can use all this momentum in order to solve our problems with the Ethiopia, which hosted, the headquarters of the African Union. And I think this will be maybe a very important issue, and we should raise it every now and then there in order to guarantee that our share of water will not be, let us say, reduced or has any kind of dangerous steps from the Ethiopian side. So Egypt is always, saying that we are not against the development of any African countries, but in the meanwhile, we cannot also deprive the Egyptians and the Sudanese from their life according to some ambitious plans for Ethiopia to build, this dam or any other projects will affect our share of water from the Nile. So
yes.
It is a very complicated situation, but I think our desire to mean the cooperation or to enhance our cooperation with the African countries is prevailing now. And I think all of them, they now can recognize that Egypt is serious in this policy, and we are not against the development of any African countries. On the contrary, we can help. We are actually building a dam in Tanzania, and we are helping, the African countries in order to face the COVID-19 recently. So we are there, and we will maintain our policy to help our brothers in the African continent.
Yes, also I want to ask you another question, Your Excellency. Apart from, speaking of the Egyptian policy, we've seen that also very clearly during the Egyptian presidency of the African Union is the strategy that Egypt is implementing when it comes to resolving the internal affairs of the different African countries and the disputes, silencing of the guns, cooperation between borders to eliminate terrorism or combat terrorism. Tell us about the successful steps Egypt has also achieved with this regard, because what our guest is saying also here in the studio is that there are parts of Africa where it's very complicated and there's a lot of efforts that needs to be done to eliminate terrorism and stop these terrorist organizations from enhancing weapons and heavy machineries.
Yeah, so what you just mentioned actually is the real ingredients for any, sustainable cooperation between the African countries. Our initiative to silence the gun and to eliminate all, the factors of disputes between some African countries and even the internal, I would say, civil wars in some African countries also. I think this is, the beginning of a real cooperation between the countries, and the most important ingredients in order to have a real cooperation without any kind of prejudice or, let us say, animosity between the African countries. So this is the real base for good cooperation, and I think Egypt is aware of that, and that's why we are trying to solve all the problems with a diplomatic solution, not to go to this kind of conflicts with arms or anything like this. So I think the African countries now recognize that Egypt is playing a very prudent role in Africa, and I think they also can see that we are very much aware that our national security is really connected with the stability in the African countries, and that's why we are working very hard in order to implement this kind of peaceful solution for all the disputes in Africa.
All right, Your Excellency Ambassador Mohammed El Arabi, former Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining us on the Daily Debate this evening. We still have a lot to talk about with our guest here, Mr. Nasser Refaei. But to speak more about the Egyptian efforts, we have African leaders who's lauding El-Sisi's efforts to achieve peace in Africa in this report, and we'll be right back.
This edition of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development is held this week under the theme Shaping Africa's New Normal, Recovering Stronger, Rebuilding Better. The forum's second edition was held virtually starting 1st of March and will last until the 5th. In a speech at the forum, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi stated that Egypt was keen to hold the second edition of the forum to use the momentum generated by the first and its successes. He stressed that Egypt believes that the present time is optimum to discuss with the African countries the daunting challenges facing the continent, seeking the best ways and mechanisms to shore up the Africans' common efforts, aiming at getting over the pandemic to rebuild better and take the African continent to safety. In his speech, the President described the activation of the African Continental Free Trade Area earlier this year as a good example of the success of Africa's collective work. The President added that beside the challenge of COVID-19, the continent is still suffering from the dangers of armed conflicts and civil wars, as well as organized crime, the spread of weapons, illegal immigration, and forced displacement. All these challenges require joint efforts to support the mechanism that stops and settles conflicts and enhances the continent's abilities to face those challenges. President al-Sisi ended his speech by stating that the African and international solidarity was urgent for humanity to overcome security challenges, as well as that of the coronavirus, since the current stage has brought new challenges, foremost of which is providing the necessary vaccine for African people. The President emphasized the necessity to provide such a vaccine in a more equitable and just manner in response to the demands of the peoples of Africa. President al-Sisi's speech was followed by that of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, chairperson of the African Union Commission, and several African presidents, including those of Rwanda, Burundi, Tunisia, and South Sudan, who all agreed that the continent was passing through exceptional circumstances and that solidarity and joint work was the only way to deal with the challenges.
Welcome back again. You're still watching us here on the Daily Debate. I'm still joined in the studio with Mr. Nasser Refaei, Nigerian journalist. Now, what do you think, in your opinion, is required in order for the countries here in Africa to achieve a qualitative leap, if I may say, in terms of different fields, to be able to meet the aspirations of the common African citizen?
That needs a lot of, the cooperation between the all African countries, because some countries, they are very serious of trying to bring up the African continent, but unfortunately some of the countries are not. The problem of the African, most of the African countries is that whenever some leaders trying to make a forum for trying to join hand together with the all African countries, unfortunately some of the African leaders trying to eliminate a little democracy they have in their country, so that they just continue to be in the power in their country for life. So that is what leads to a huge corruption that African countries facing. It's the first challenge that facing the most of the African countries. Whenever the corruption is there, so believe that there is no any achievement in most of these countries. I'm bringing an example with my country, Nigeria. Nigeria, I'm trying to eliminate the corruption maybe for more than 30 years. But unfortunately they couldn't. Maybe we have some different, maybe more than 7 presidents pass for the past 30 years, but they couldn't that. So therefore, that's why up till now we couldn't, we couldn't eliminate the terrorism in our country. Unfortunately, all the time the people of Nigeria are trying to, they bring the attention of their leaders to try to avoid.
So what do you recommend as a journalist? There's the African Union, which is an international organization that's been there for ages, and it does under it hold a number of responsibilities. Do you think that maybe such organizations should have more of a political will or pressure or cooperation to be able to, again, fill the aspirations of the African citizens, which is at the end what it should be pouring into their benefits?
I think this, we can give an example for this forum of Aswan Forum, which is named as Shaping the Africa's New Normal. I think the African need that because the African Union is still, still going or not on soft, on not solid ground. Therefore, all the achievements that African leaders want to achieve in the continent, it will not come just like that until all the African leaders come together. This forum, I think, if you look at it, you will see that this forum wants to, bring or use a little that the African continent have for, in terms of economics, democracy, and then countering the terrorism, something like this. If all these issues brought together and the African leaders work seriously to eliminate this terrorism,
things
and
have been a
then
much
try
more
to bring,
different level. Yes.
Yeah.
We do have another phone call over live on air. His Excellency Ambassador Ahmed Haggak, former Assistant Secretary General of the Organization of the African Unity, the OAU. Thank you for joining us, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much.
We're talking here today about the African continent, and we're talking about specifically the Egyptian efforts in rebuilding good political relations between Egypt and the African nations. Now, if I was to ask you, Your Excellency, what does Egypt represent to Africa today? What can you tell me?
I think Egypt can present itself as successful in executing or implementing major economic projects, but also Egypt should try to learn from Africa what they were doing successfully. So the effect will be reciprocal between Egypt and Africa, and I think the Africans will welcome that very much. We are living in the same continent, we are the same people. May I propose that the next session should concentrate on the cultural effects in Africa. Unfortunately, Africans don't know each other very well culturally, and we should try to translate books in book fairs. And I'm happy to note that the Egyptian International Book Fair, for now several years, are translating more culture books from Africa into Arabic, and there is a lot of demand for such books. And this Aswan forum is very important. In spite of the pandemic, corona pandemic, which prevented the physical presence of our leaders and our participants, it is incumbent on somebody in Africa, and here I'm happy to know that Egypt took this initiative, is trying to make a regular consultation platform among African people and African participants, and especially for women and youth. Women and youth are priorities for the African Union. That's why Egypt, for several years now, have been holding special dialogue and between African youth and their leaders. That's why I think Egypt is trying its best to present what it's going to do in spite of the limitation. Egypt is not a rich country, but it does feel that it should contribute the major wealth which the Egyptian possess at present is its known people. We have a lot of cadres who are sending many doctors, engineers, and university professors, military officers to different African countries. We are sending supplies for to try to treat corona virus, and we organize many training programs in Egypt for diplomats in English and French, and the military, nurses, economic development and so on. So I think we are not doing very bad, and I think Africa is appreciating our role because training and uplifting the quality of African professionals is very important as an ingredient in economic and sustainable development.
Yes, Your Excellency, another question I'd like to ask you. In a world that has become more of a global village, in mentalities and generations that are changing, some countries in Africa are still very resistant and rigid to change, and that is going to hinder the full cooperation in a bloc of an entire continent that's full of resources. From your perspective, is the political pressure more likely going to release this rigidity or tendency, or is it the economic pressure? What comes first with this regard?
I didn't catch it. What you said, some countries in Africa are resisting?
Yes, according to my guest who's also here, journalist, some countries in Africa are still rigid and resistant to change. What makes it easier to release this rigidity? Is it the political pressure, or is it the economic pressure? And I'm talking here again, pouring into the will of the African citizen.
That's why there is a merit in this periodical consultation. There are some quarters in different parts of the world who don't want to see the interaction among African countries and African population themselves, or even African leaders. If we listen to those mischievous attempts, I think we will implement their only ugly intentions. So if we meet and consult, and we should be frank and transparent and tell each other, I heard that you are trying to exploit our resources and vice versa. And that's why transparency and frankness is the best way to combat.
Definitely. Ambassador Ahmed Hagag, former Assistant Secretary General of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, thank you for joining us. We just have 1 minute to wrap up, and I believe you have a closing statement that you'd like to comment on my last question.
Okay, I think what I want to just comment as your last sentence that you said, some African countries that resist to be changed. Yes, I can say refuse even to change to what is necessary to be changed, because as you said, the world is global. It's a global village that everyone must rush not to be left behind to enter this village. Otherwise, you will find yourself alone, and then you can't achieve what you want to achieve alone. So therefore, yes, to come together for us African continent is very, very important to achieve what Africans, especially the African Agenda 2063. I think I can say Egypt was one of the countries that really going under this agenda, because up to now, everywhere when the people come to the Egypt, yes, they witness that there is some development and then sustainable, projects that is going under the leadership of the Refaei in
Thank
Egypt.
you very much, Mr. Nasser Refaei, Nigerian journalist. I don't know where you got your Arabic name from, but I believe they do call Arabic names in Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining in. We do hope that we see a greater Nigerian association here in Egypt. Thank you for joining us. That brings us to the end of our episode of The Daily Debate. I'm Yasmin Bakir signing off. Thank you for watching.